Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming back to the channel. I really appreciate you being here. This is the second installment of Dead by Daylight Killers. So I have been reading backstories of characters from the video game Dead by Daylight, which is a very fun multi-platform game that you can play on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, your phone. I believe they even have it for the Switch now. It's a great game. You can play with your friends no matter the console, and it's a lot of fun, especially when you involve your friends. So the last video that I had was of the killers, and I left off on the gentleman that's behind me now, which is the Death Slinger. So we are going to be reading more stories and the backstories of these killers and kind of what got them into this mess. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the actual next killer for today's reading, which will be... ooh, the Oni. So, this is probably going to be a 3-part video, but this is the Oni, and I always say the one in Oni because I think I'm clever. So, there's that. He is from the Cursed Legacy chapter, and here is his backstory. His difficulty's hard, and I can tell why in the game, because he does this crazy charge where he just kind of charges after you, and it's nuts. So the backstory for the Oni is honoring his family's name was never enough for Kazan Yamoka. Is that Yamoka? Oh, Yamoka. I get it now. Honoring his family's name was never enough for Kazan Yamoka. He wanted to surpass his father's reputation and end what he saw as the thinning of samurai culture, with farmers often posing as samurai. His father tried to turn Kazan's attention to more noble pursuits, but Kazan refused to heed his advice, and borrowing his father's katana, he embarked on a dark pilgrimage to prove his worth and rid Japan of impostors. Ignoring the code that had been taught to him, Kazan killed impostors in the hills, in the valleys, on the beaches, and in the woodland. The killings were brutal, cruel, and morbid. He humiliated farmers and warriors alike, yanking off their top knots and stripping them of their armor. His rage, bloodlust, and perverse sense of humor knew no bounds. Monks believed he was possessed by something dark and otherworldly, and cursed him, while a noble lord began to call him Oni Yamoka. Okay, I don't know if he's too loud or not, so I'm going to turn it down just a tad. The rageful samurai insult both to Kazan and his family. Determined to redeem his family's name, Kazan now butchered anyone who dared call him Oni Yamoka. The insult confused him. He had defeated the best, and he had purified the samurai class by ridding the land of impostors. How could anyone refer to him as an orc? Had it been because he had marched into a battlefield to cut down the fiercest warriors? Had it been because he had taken a kanobo and dashed hundreds of skulls with it? Or had it been because of his need to secure a trophy from his victims? It didn't matter. Being called an orc was more than he could bear, and an ominous voice in his head urged him to strike down the lord who had desecrated his name. As Kazan made for the lord's town, let me listen just to see if this is too loud, because I don't want him... Is he... No, he's not screaming too much. Okay, good. I wanted to just make sure of that, because you never know. As Kazan made for the lord's town, he suddenly found himself face to face with a samurai standing on a dirt road, blocking his way. Kazan readied his is that a kanobo? Kanobo? Yeah. Kanobo? I'm going to say kanobo. Without a word, the samurai attacked and quickly secured the upper hand, but he hesitated. With a devastating blow, Kazan crushed the samurai's head and cracked his helmet. As Kazan approached the fallen samurai, he saw his father's face and staggered back to his hunches. His father stared at Kazan with mingled shame and regret as he issued his last breath. Kazan closed his eyes and screamed in agony until he could scream no more. When he opened his eyes again, his father was gone. Not only had he killed his father, but he allowed thieves to steal his body for armor. Bitter, lost, and delusional, Kazan roamed the land aimlessly with his father's voice rattling in his head, taunting him, reminding him of his failures, sending him into fits of uncontrollable black rage. One day, walking in the woods, Kazan happened upon an Oni statue. He stopped and stood motionless for a long time. The weathered and overgrown statue seemed to be ridiculing him, accusing him of being the impostor samurai he had so desperately sought to destroy. Kazan shook the laughing voice out of his head and half remembered the lord who had ridiculed him as Oni Yamoka. With renewed anger, Kazan journeyed to a town high up in the snowy mountains where the lord resided. A dozen samurai met Kazan at the gates of the town. A dozen samurai fell to his kanabo. His speed and strength were unmatched. His rage was incomprehensible. Covered in blood and gore, Kazan battled through the town and soon found the lord hiding in a villa. He dragged him out of the cabinet, sliced his tendons to immobilize him, and watched him beg and squirm like a dog. Without hesitation, he thrust his fists into the lord's mouth and yanked out the wicked tongue that had desecrated his name. Satisfied, Kazan exited the villa to find himself surrounded by dozens of farmers wielding rusted scythes, sharp pitchforks, and heavy clubs. He survived the first few assaults, but there were too many attackers coming from every direction. Within moments, Kazan was on the ground, staring at a cold, indifferent, darkening sky as farmers took turns stabbing and torturing the Oni who had butchered their beloved lord. The frenzied mob dragged Kazan to a small stone mill to continue the torture, and finally left him to die in a slow, agonizing death. When they returned, the mill was filled with strange black fog, and Kazan's body and the kanabo were nowhere to be found. It was the beginning of a dark legend about a rageful Oni haunting the town. Like, if you watch him, his eye moves in the middle. It's super creepy. Alright. We're moving on. The next one is going to be pretty familiar for some of you who actually, watch movies and Netflix shows and stuff like this. But this is the Demigorgon. His difficulty is intermediate, and he is actually from the Stranger Things chapter. He's gross. Okay? That's the only way to describe him. And the fact that his face twitches and stuff like that it grosses me out even more. He's got a very short backstory. Thank goodness. He's cool looking though, I'm not gonna lie. So, backstory. A blooming mouth full of needle-like teeth for a face, large, curved, razor-sharp claws, and powerful legs to pounce on victims make the Demigorgon a frightening monster to face in any dimension. It is a nightmare of unrestrained, feral rage as it hunts down its prey and rips it to pieces, devouring every last morsel of flesh and gore, leaving nothing for scavengers. The creature is untouched by any sense of compassion or restraint. Looming over its victim, it shows no doubt or mercy, just the pure instinct of its unstable bloodlust as it delivers the death blow. A perfect hunter, the Demigorgon is a macabre testament to the horrors lurking in the upside down, and why it was a choice picking for the enemy. Blah. It's just gross. I mean, let me see if you can hear him. Yeah, you can kind of hear his little chatter that he puts out there. Ugh, it's gross. Alright, so we're going to move on to the next one, which is going to be Ghostface. I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see its mouth open, because a lot of the times you get to see its mouth open. Oh. Like that. Gross. Alright, so we're going to move on to Ghostface. A lot of you will remember him from movies as well. He is, he's ultra stabby. Look at him go. Alright, so he is actually from the Ghostface chapter. And I can't imagine. I love those movies too. Anywho, so let's get to it. Let me move my legs real quick. Okay. Backstory, and his difficulty is hard, so the backstory. Danny Johnson, known as Jed Olson by some, grabbed the newspaper from the kitchen counter. It was a week old, but his face was on the front page, grainy and sunken. It was one of those muggy afternoons in Florida when heat and humidity pre-meted everything in the kitchen, making him sweat while standing still. He slouched in a damp chair to read. This article had better be good. His work in Roseville had been outstanding. Okay, I'm a Floridian, so it is hot and muggy here. I understand where he's coming from. Ghostface disappears, June 18th, 1993. At first glance, Jed Olson was a modest and enthusiastic freelancer with experience in a variety of small newspapers. The staff at Roseville Gazette appreciated how easygoing and honest he seemed, and how he was treated as a stranger for no more than 5 minutes into his interview. Jed quickly spotted the editor-in-chief in the room, gave him a wide smile and a firm handshake, and talked about good old American values. And that was it. He was in. Ex-contributor at the Roseville Gazette. So he's a smooth talker. Olson never justified his erratic career path, which zigzagged between several small towns from Utah to Pennsylvania. There was no verification of his previous jobs. He had a decent portfolio plus a good attitude, and they needed a contributor right now. The Roseville Murders. Olson had been working at the newspaper for 5 months when Roseville murders began. Victims from young to old stabbed to death in their homes. From the reports, the victims seemed chosen at random, yet the killer knew his way around in the houses. And multiple stab wounds indicated a personal motive. No traces of DNA were found. The local police were confounded. The murders were carried with fury akin to a crime of passion, yet coldly premeditated. The murderer also liked to stalk his targets. 2 victims had reported being followed on their way home by a dark figure a few days prior to their death. The killer would follow them from Walleye's, a small bar in northern Roseville, and snap pictures of them at home while looking for a way in. He could watch the same victim for weeks, meticulously registering their habits and routines. When he felt the urge to kill, he'd visit the most vulnerable victim on his list and break inside the house quietly. The whole staff worked on the Roseville murder story. Olson was often sent to interview the family of victims and relay official statements from the police. Unknown to everyone at the time, his involvement added to the final body count. The Ghostface. Panic swelled in Roseville when Olson produced footage of a hooded figure breaking into a house at night. The masked face, a white blur in the dark, stared at the camera for a second before disappearing inside. Ghostface Caught on Tape was the resulting article written by Olson. He seemed proud of his work at the time, enjoying how the whole town feared his ghost stories. Weeks later, Olson left a note on his work desk and disappeared. I hope you like my stories. I enjoyed bringing them to life. Don't worry, I'm not done. Jed Olson. The Roseville law enforcement still refuses to comment as Jed Olson's remains at large. Danny smiled, ripping out the article from the newspaper. When the investigation had been pointing to him, he packed his bags and left Roseville swiftly. He got up, the calmy sweat pooling his skin. An oppressive humidity engulfed him as he entered the bedroom. Condensation dribbled on a small, misted-up window as bits of cracked wallpaper hung limply. Its floral pattern was covered with gruesome photos and newspaper headlines. Danny pinned the week-old article on top of a picture of lacerated scalps. A faint pang of hunger hit him, and he wondered when he had eaten last. Was it this morning, while washing his knife and clothes, or was it last night, after following that girl down the street? He couldn't remember clearly. Taking a step back, he admired his work on the wall. His mind drifted, remembering all the articles he'd written, the stories he'd planned, and the scenes he brought to life. A shiver ran through him. A chilling breeze transformed the bedroom's humidity into an opaque, freezing fog. A woman shrieked. Dead leaves crunched under his feet. He smiled in anticipation. Dang, he brought his wickedness to Florida. What did we ever do to him? That's how serial killers work. Anywho, so we're going to move on to one that I don't like playing against, because when I'm a survivor and I can see her like twisting, creepy body running through the fields, it freaks me out. Okay? It's gross. But she's fun to play against, and I like a lot of her outfits and stuff. It's just that the nature of her, I guess. Look at her. Oh, no, wait. She doesn't twist and stuff. She's the one that I like her outfits. The other one, forget what her name is. We'll get to her, but she's the one that twists and gets all gross. Anyway, this is the plague, and she has her little dusty thing that she's going to bless you with. Just kidding. She's not going to bless you. She's going to kill you. So the plague is intermediate difficulty, and she is of the Demise of Faithful chapter. And here is her backstory. Does she do anything? I guess not. Maybe she just chills. When she was 5 years old, I'm going to say her name is Adaris. I'm going to go with Adaris. So when she was 5 years old, Adaris, the youngest of family of 7, was left on the brick red burning steps of the temple of the temple of purgation. Hey. It's at the center of Babylon. To process her shock and sorrow, she held on to the belief that the gods had a plan for her. Her new life was one of quiet servitude. She would tend to the gardens, prepare ceremonial meals, and polish ceremonial incense burners. At night, she would pray for a sign that would reveal her purpose. That poor little girl, dropped off that young. When she came of age, she attended the high-ranking priests during the yearly worshipping of the sea goat, the god of water and creation. Swinging a censer down the great Apostle Hall, she cast thick black fumes that reached the cold, towering stone pillars before dissipating. Her worries lifted, and resulting bliss made her feel closer to the gods than ever. She worked herself to the bone each day that followed, fulfilling her duties while taking on new ones. She had aided the priests during purification rituals. The priests were more and more in need of assistance. Cleansings were being performed daily to answer the demand from outside high temple walls, where a catastrophic plague had resurfaced. Within months, the priests contracted the disease, and it did not take long before they too became weak to perform any kind of ritual. Adaris, having assisted in many purification rituals, was the only one able to carry on. The swelling panic had to be contained, even if by a novice. Anxious before her first ceremony, Adaris visited the priest's sanctuary chamber. When she lit the candles, she noticed a narrow opening in the back. Sliding through the gap, she reached a crypt hidden under the sanctuary. The chamber was bare except for the golden statue of a woman who stood outstretched hands, her fingers covered in jewels. It was a sign Adaris had been waiting for. The great hall was packed with followers who bowed down as Adaris entered. She strode to the brick altar and grabbed a ceremonial dagger forged in silver, her ruby ringed fingers wrapping around the blade like claws. The sudden display of luxury intrigued the followers, who were struck already by her youth and beauty. As she began reciting the epic of creation, a woman in the back swooned and collapsed. Adaris rushed to her and noticed the black blisters covering her feet. Without hesitation, Adaris grabbed her sacred blade and swung it at her own foot, severing a toe. Then she offered the bloody part to the gods, asking them to protect the woman. A silence fell over the followers, who revered Adaris as their new priestess. Tales of her wealth, beauty, and devotion began to spread across the city as quickly as the disease. Soon, Adaris's followers called the high priestess of Babylon. No wonder why she's always fancy looking. But her faith was tired when she showed the first signs of infection. Her cough became a mix of phlegm and blood, her neck erupted in abscesses, and her four-toed foot darkened. Ashamed of her condition, she began wearing a veil headpiece that carried a censer that masked the rancid smell of sick that clung to her skin. Hoping to be saved, she kept performing the rituals, offering blessed water and food to her followers. But no ritual could save her. In a desperate attempt to appease the gods, Adaris banished herself from the city. She traveled north with a few followers, venturing through the cold woodlands of Yerstu until it was no longer possible to walk. They camped in a damp cave where Adaris lay in a pool of vomit. Her foot, which had turned black, was so swollen she could not go any further. Her followers and she realized the truth in that cave. They were all infected with the plague. Kneeling among her retching followers, Attiris made one last prayer. The black fumes of incense rose into the damp air before being whipped off by a cold breeze. Neither the body of Attiris nor her followers were ever found. Many told tales of her return, but no one truly knew what fate had befallen the high priestess of Babylon. Dang. That sucks. No wonder why she wears that headpiece. Good to know. I've never read her backstory before, so this was pretty interesting. All right, let me take a sip. This is the one. This next one is the one that creeps me out. The spirit. Look at her. Talk about creepy. She looks like she's gonna bust through your TV. Like, imagine if her hair just kind of calmed down. She's totally the girl from The Ring. She just didn't want us to know. Alright, so her difficulty level is hard, and she's from the Shattered Bloodline chapter, and this is the spirit's backstory. Look at her arm. Gross. Oh, you can't see it. My fat head's in the way. Maybe I can move my fat head. That way you can see her creepy arm. Ew, it's floating. Floaty arm. Anywho, backstory. Rin was the only child of the Yamoka family. She was raised in the dusty halls of a traditional house in Kagawa. She studied education at... Oh, geez. Okay. You know, we already know that I suck at pronunciation, and now I'm going to murder all of these words. She studied education at Takamastu, a private university which weighed heavily on her family's shaky finances. Her mother got ill that year, and the bills started piling up. Rin worked part-time in a futile attempt to help lighten the load. Her father faced a debt that grew without end. He started working double shifts in hopes of obtaining a promotion. That's when he started losing sleep. A dark whisper would keep him awake at night, reminding him of his hopeless situation. Exhausted, he started to lose grasp of reality, fighting to deny the voice whispering at night. Rin's father made a desperate move. He met with his superior and explained the situation. He begged for a bonus, an advance, time off, anything. His request was denied. The company had launched a defective production line that was costing them dearly. Someone had to be held accountable, and Rin's father fitted the bill perfectly. He was fired after 22 years of service. That evening, Rin came home from work. She stayed late to entertain customers that lingered at the restaurant. As she parked her bike in the shed, she heard her mother scream from the house. She rushed in, climbing up the stairs to her parents' room. There, she found bits and pieces of her mother on the floor. Her limbs were clean cut, tangled up in an unnatural position. Her breasts were sliced up, revealing her rib cage, which was cracked open. Rin gagged. A sharp katana came crashing down. Rin blocked the blade, which bit into her bare forearm. The shock of recognition interrupted her pain. Her father was wielding the katana with a stoic expression. She cried out to make him stop, but he slashed her arm again. She rushed off and slid on the blood-smeared floor, using the door frame as support. She raised herself up. The katana ripped through the wall, cleaving her other arm. She screamed in pain as she limped into the hallway, only to be met by her father's blade. She stepped back, trembling, as she held together the soft, loose flesh of her abdomen. Images of her mother's tangled limbs flashed before her eyes. Rin charged at her father, making him stumble back. He pushed her torn abdomen, and she wrenched out in pain. As she struggled to get back up, he slashed her thigh, making her collapse on the floor. As she crawled towards the stairs, he grabbed her hair and yanked her against a partition? Oh, yeah, a partition. The glass shattered on impact, and she fell through, landing one floor down. She heard footsteps somewhere above her. With effort, she moved, worming her way into a sea of broken glass. The shards gnawed at her, ripping her flesh. She had to be stopped. Oh, geez. He had to be stopped. He would not get away with what he'd done to her, what he'd done to her mother. Coughing up blood, her chin grazed the glass, aiding to the bleeding. A low-pitched heartbeat started to ring in her ears. Her body felt so heavy as she could no longer move. The ground shook with her father's footsteps. She knew she was not going to make it, but she no longer cared. She would make him pay, in this life or the next. A dark fog slowly veiled her eyes, but it could not subdue her rage. She would not rest, not yet. The darkness whispered, promising blood and revenge. An oath was made, and Ren closed her eyes. Aww. I'm sorry, Ren. Here I am thinking you're super gross and your dad murdered you. Damn, dude. I hope she gets revenge. He probably did it because he was afraid of shame being brought to his family for loss of money. It happens. I've heard about it, other serial killers and whatnot. But that's sad. I'm sorry. I can no longer hate your weird twisting body. Sad. Don't forget, I always try to put it in the I always try to put it in the description that this is pretty graphic, so viewer discretion is always advised. Next. The Clown. His difficulty is intermediate as well. He is from the Curtain Call chapter, and he is gross. The coughing is what gets me, and you'll hear it. It's a bit much, honestly. All right, his difficulty is intermediate, and here we go. Kenneth Chase was born in 1932 by difficult labor, which his mother wouldn't survive. This event drove a rift between him and his father that never closed. As the boy grew, so did his father's resentment and his drinking habit. By the time Kenneth was at school, they lived mostly separate lives. Academically, he was unremarkable, coasting by on his significant athletic prowess. He grew tall and strong, excelling at track events, but was shunned any attempts to coax him into team sports. On his walk home from school, he would often find feathers on the ground, and he soon began a collection, keeping them in a cigar box under his bed. With his father either at work or in an alcoholic-induced stupor, Kenneth had hours to spend alone, transfixed by the regularity of the feathers' barbs and feeling the softness as he ran them over his lips. Watching the birds that came to the feeder in his garden, he imagined how soft they must be and resolved to catch one. He ingratiated himself with the local dentist, soon procuring some anesthetic. Using this, he rigged up a trap on the feeder that he hoped would knock out a bird long enough that he could touch it. After a few failed attempts, he managed to trap a robin. As it lay in his hand, he felt a sudden rush of life at his mercy. He had planned to release it once it recovered from the anesthetic. Instead, his eyes flickered back into consciousness, and he began to struggle. His grip remained firm. His fingers slowly tightened around its throat, squeezing until its chest feathers were finally still. He disposed of the body, keeping just a feather, with which he started a new collection, discarding the others as fake. I don't like animal abuse, which means he needs to be murdered. You don't do that to birds, sir. I dislike him even more now. By the late 1940s, Kenneth had left school and started working as a busboy at a local diner. He had also escalated to a larger prey, like squirrels. No! Raccoons and dogs, becoming skilled at customizing the anesthetic dosage for each. No. Not nice. Sir. I don't like the story already. I don't like it. In early 1954, a young man went missing and the town was turned upside down in the search. A few months later, Kenneth's father, while doing some work in the crawl space under the house, found a cigar box. He broke it open, and to his horror, saw that it contained feathers, animal paws, and a man's finger. Returning from work, Kenneth saw his father leaving the crawl space with the cigar box in his hands. He turned on his heel and never went home again. After a few weeks of living rough, he encountered a traveling circus and with his prestigious strength was hired to work the ropes. He assumed a new name, Jeffrey Hawk. Suddenly surrounded by a close-knit community, Jeffrey had to learn to socialize. He donned a new personality, like a disguise, quickly becoming known as charming and helpful, and was welcomed into his new family. Over the next decade, he stayed with the circus, traveling the length and breadth of the USA, but with the inherent life providing few repercussions, he fell into his bad habits: drink, junk food, drugs. He indulged all of them to excess. For a time, these vices were enough, but then his old urges returned, and his nomadic existence became a cover for him to resume killing. He stole clothes and makeup from performers, fashioning a disguise that would let him get close to his victims before he anesthetized them, bringing them back to his cavern where they would awake to find themselves bound and at his mercy. He would finally get to have his fun, mentally and physically torturing them, their screams fueling him before being lost in the night. Once their strength was at its lowest, he would carefully examine their fingers, searching for the prettiest, running them over his tongue to find the tastiest. Once he found the best, he would cut it from their hand and proudly add it to his collection, disposing of the rest of the body as pointless waste. Men, women, young and old, he didn't care. The essence of a good collection is in the variety and in the memories and the stories they evoke. He removed the costume less and less, shedding his old personality with it, fully embracing the clown, his true self. With time, he became complacent and sloppy. A victim managed to work free on her bindings while he was sleeping off the drink. She escaped, screaming for help, and he awoke to find the rest of the circus bearing down on him. He whipped his horse, and the cavern disappeared into the night. Since then, he roamed the country, a parasite who would always be found at a carnival or circus, but who had never been seen on any playbill. He lured those brave or foolish enough to come near, trapped them, and moved on before they could be found missing. Somewhere along the way, he left the ordinary roads of the USA behind him, traveling through a veil of mist and entering a new realm. It was a place of transience and impermanence, perfectly suiting the life he had chosen to lead. Feeling more at home than he had his entire life, he set up camp and waited for his first visitor. So, I by far hate him the most now by reading his backstory, because most of you who know me know that I love animals, and I think this guy is a disgusting, nasty jerk, and I wish that survivors could kill killers, because as a survivor character, I would totally kill his clown character. Like, if the pallet accidentally broke and went through his face, that would be great. Don't hurt animals, people. Don't hurt other people, obviously, but don't hurt animals even more. Ugh. Alright, so this is my last reading for today's episode. Episode? Okay. This is the pig from the Saw chapter, and this is her backstory. Okay, so we know she doesn't kill animals. Hopefully she found that mask, and it's like a mask, and it's not a real pig's head, because if it's a real pig's head, I'm gonna lose my mind. I can't remember. It's a real pig's head, isn't it? Damn it. When John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw, planned for his son to be born during the Chinese zodiac year of the pig, he wanted it to represent fertility and rebirth, a new beginning for him and his wife, and the start of a charmed life for his son. But that plan was shattered on the night that a junkie broke into his wife's clinic, hoping to score. After this event resulted in the death of his unborn son, John finally caught up with the junkie, making him his first test subject, and the pig was chained forever too. It became a representation of the disease that was rotting John from the inside, a reminder that we are all just meat unless we elevate ourselves through our actions by grasping life by the jaws of death. The pig became a vessel, an agent of Jigsaw, conveying the subjects to their test. For some of those who emerged victorious, the pig could still be a rebirth into their new lives as apprentices, even disciples of Jigsaw. That was the case for Amanda Young, a troubled soul whose life had been a catalog of harm, both for herself and those around her. That changed when she faced and bested Jigsaw test. Deciding her life was worth something, she became devoted to Jigsaw's cause, ready to take over when the cancer consumed him. But she became more dependent on John, her anguish at this impending death combining with the belief that their test subjects were capable of saving themselves, of being reborn in the cubicle of games. Seeing this, John presented her with another game, another chance to save herself, but Amanda let her rage and jealousy rule her actions. She failed the test and took a bullet as a consequence. Bleeding out on the tiled floor, darkness engulfed Amanda's vision, accompanied by a sound like creaking wood. When she was in the forest, once more, viewing the world through the eyes of a pig. Trees surrounded her, their branches clawing at her from all sides. Waves of panic washed over her, and she could hear her breathing reverberating inside the mask. It's a mask. We're going to say it's a mask. It's a mask. It's just a mask. Had she been damned, cursed, to spend the days here in this guise? Or maybe this was another test. Maybe she hadn't failed at all. John always thought one step ahead of everyone else, planned for everything eventually, and he would never give up on her, surely. Jigsaw may have gone, but he passed on to her another, a being from whom she would be for the pig again. Ultimately, she saw now that she had been right in the choices she had made. The time for games was over. There was no chance of redemption for any of them. They were meat, and meat was destined for slaughter. Creepy. I liked the Jigsaw movies. I always thought they were really good, and I always thought the stories that were behind them were pretty intense. The deaths were always extremely gruesome, but I'm a horror fan, so they were up my alley. And I'm happy that I got to end with her, because going up against her as a survivor is pretty rough. She's very quiet, very tricky, and I'm glad that they incorporated her into the game. That freaking party hat drives me nuts. Every time I get one on, that timer hits and I start to panic, because I do work well under pressure, but my anxiety is like meh, through the roof. So this has been another installment of Dead by Daylight Killers. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. If you ever want to see me play Dead by Daylight live, please come hang out with me over on my Facebook channel. I'm known over there as Mama Lee. Again, my name is Christy. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. I really do appreciate you guys. You guys are the best, and I hope to see you again soon. Come over and say hi on my live. That'd be nice. Bye for now.